Welcome to the Tourism AI podcast, where we talk about all things at the intersection of artificial intelligence and tourism. Today, I'm super excited. We have Jeremy Adamson back on the podcast. We had Jeremy a little while ago, and Jeremy has evolved in my life since last time we talked. So before I get to the evolution, Jeremy really has a background in data analytics and sort of technology generally. Has written two books on the topics. One is called Geeks with Empathy, and the other one is called Minding the Machines, or Mind the Machines. Jeremy, you can correct me later or now if you want. And he also is a person that's been working quite closely with me on a number of different initiatives, including Tourism Ops AI, which is the reporting automation tool that we're building for the tourism industry. And in that capacity, Jeremy is now, I guess, officially a partner of mine, business partner of mine. Many different things, many evolutions, many cool projects. Jeremy brings a lot to the table. And today we are going to talk a little bit about a conversation that's been coming up a lot, which is, AI and data governance. And I keep telling everybody 2026 is the year where we're taking sexy away. We're not, my joke, Jeremy, is I have a picture of Justin Timberlake with a mop and a broom that I made with AI, and I put it into my presentation, and he's taking sexy back, but we're taking it away. So but it is actually a sexy topic. And it's funny because the more this whole AI conversation evolves, the more it starts to lead to this conversation around data governance, sort of AI governance, policy. And I think, interestingly, I wrote a blog actually that just got put up today on the Tourism AI Network podcast. And it was about, the conversation happening in the public between Anthropic and the Department of War, and how that conversation has really brought to the forefront actually a lot of conversations around AI and its impact on society and, decisions and ethics. And within that conversation, AI and data governance, I think, falls into that category. And so it's sort of, to me, that event that's happening out in public is bringing a conversation to the forefront that I think I'd like to have with you today. So with that very, very long introduction, Jeremy, you've obviously worked across a lot of industries over your career. I continue to work actually across a number of different industries, working with me quite a lot in the tourism industry. Can you give me a bit of a sense overall across industries, a bit of a general sense of what you see when you talk to companies with respect to their AI and data governance practices? If you wanted to give it a state out of 10 over across the board, what would you say?
I think I've really enjoyed my time in tourism so far. And like every other industry I've worked in, when you're looking at it from the outside, you kind of have a picture in your head of the way things are, and it's never quite that way. So what I found so far is a lot of really passionate people that clearly care about what they're doing, and it's some of the best people to work with I found in tourism. And a lot of them are by intuition or by general sense of what's out there in the public, they're doing most of the right things from a governance perspective. There's just a lack of process and documentation around it. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I found so far is if you are found in violation of PIPEDA or GDPR, one of these other regulatory agencies that a lot of us are under the dominion of, it's not going to be enough that you're doing the right things. You need documented evidence, you need processes in place, you need staff that have signed, you need all of these pieces in the background to provide evidence that you've done everything you possibly can to protect the data of your customers. So I think people have great intentions and their intuition is really good. It's just a matter of structure and process and good discipline and governance around that to move it to the next level and make sure you're completely protected.
Interesting. Yeah. So, what's interesting about what you just said there is I'm part of a couple of organizations right now that are going through an accreditation process. And it really reminds me of what you just described there, right? It's like, a lot of the conversations are, yeah, we're doing this, but do we have it written down? Do we have a policy? Do people understand what it means? All that. So that's kind of what you're talking about in sort of simple language is really documenting, is really, to your point, providing that evidence. Is there a training component and an evidence of people understanding what the policies are component to all of that as well in terms of a sort of how to execute it in practice?
There definitely is, and that's the thing is it's going to come down to the weakest link. And if you've got a staff of 15 and 14 are doing everything right, and one person just didn't know, they're a new hire, they weren't given proper training, and that person discloses private client information, you're not going to be able to say, look at the 14 that were doing it right. It's going to come down to what the violation was. So Training plays a huge piece in it as well. You've got to make sure that everybody's aware of their obligations.
Yeah, and for me, I talk a lot about AI adoption or technology adoption in general, and this really falls into that category as a people and process issue before a technology issue. And so, I'm like a broken record on this. I talk about it all the time, and it's not enough just to have a policy, but actually, how are we talking about that policy? How are we living that policy? How are we enforcing that policy? Right? Sort of how do we bring that policy to life? And to me, that's a people and culture challenge. And I think there's a lot of work. And I think to me, this AI conversation is bringing to the forefront the realization for people just the importance of all that, because there's a lot of risk, obviously, with implementing these tools and having automation just flying out the door, and you know, putting in systems that can now work your computer, right? There's a lot of risks out there, I think, for companies, and a lack of policy and a lack of understanding is kind of scary, honestly, for a lot of those businesses. And the other thing is, never mind a sort of an AI data governance, like you're talking about, probably fairly in depth policy and evidence or whatever, but even just having some rules around what tools people can use and what they can't use and how they can use them, and like just basic to start. I find even that's fairly lacking out there. Never mind the more in-depth stuff, right? So yeah, it's a big topic. Um, and so like a lot of AI, or a lot of tourism teams are already using these tools. And what do you tell them about the risk they're taking on as a starting point in terms of when you talk to them and what you're seeing?
A lot of people, and this isn't unique to tourism, but they think if we have an acceptable use policy in our organization, then that is tacit acceptance of what they're doing. So they kind of feel as though they're more protected if they don't talk about it. So they know, three-quarters of their staff are using ChatGPT and they're putting private information in there. But as long as we don't talk about it openly, as long as we don't have a policy around that, then, at the end of the day, we can plead ignorance on this. But there's evidence of liability in almost every jurisdiction that this is very settled. And it's a bit of a scary proposition if you've got it completely uncontrolled like that. I think of an employee that's about to copy and paste, customer information to ChatGPT. They're about to write a personalized email, and they're kind of apprehensive. They know they shouldn't, but it's just so convenient. Like, I've been in that position too. You're copying and pasting in a contract from a vendor because you just want to summarize. You don't have time to read that 30 pages, and you don't make the time to go anonymize it and stuff. You click submit, you get a response back, and you say, "Well, the sky didn't fall. That wasn't so bad. I'm going to keep doing this. This is part of my workflow now." But there's a few things that come out of that. If I put, John Smith just checked into my hotel with his wife Jane and their three kids, ABC, and they ordered kosher food, and their address is XYZ. Write them a thank you email. A couple years later, someone is searching for a market for a kosher deli in their neighborhood. Might spit out, John Smith's kids, A, B, and C, live at this address, and they eat kosher food. And, if we extrapolate that a little further, I don't want to get into it, but you can imagine where that type of thing leads to. There's massive legal fines. If you're subject to GDPR, it counts as a federal crime there, is my understanding, so you could be sued for millions. And even if you're under PIPEDA, it's $100,000 per violation. So it's really a terrifying thing. And because there's no immediate consequence when you share that information, you feel, I got away with it. This wasn't so bad. But
Right.
you just exposed your organization to potential liability, ignored your duty of care to your customers at the same time. So
Yeah.
there's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and you're just talking about the legal aspect of things, and there's another probably more immediate aspect, which is reputational risk. And I used to, when I started talking about AI early in my early days, I used to tell the story about the lawyer who went and took a fake case to a judge and just got slaughtered and became the poster boy of what not to do with AI. And so I always my joke in presentations is like, don't be the poster boy or the poster child, right? And but that's the big picture poster child risk, sort of reputational risk. But even in terms of individual client interactions, even in terms of at the very ground level, not having sort of good policies in place and good sort of processes in place to make sure that mistakes aren't made, that information isn't being shared. You know what I mean? It's like, what if accidentally it shares some personal information, even just with somebody, and that just rubs them the wrong way or whatever, right? Or, so there's a lot to this beyond just the legal, I think. And really for organizations to get their heads around multi-levels or multi-layers of the sort of the problem, I think is a very valuable thing to do. So how about kind of risk of around like bias and transparency? Is that sort of a risk also that people should be aware of, and there are ways to, I guess, sort of have governance structures and ways to mitigate?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it's not as well defined if you're talking about, the ethical components of a AI engagement. If you're talking about project delivery model or, formal data governance and classification based on risk of disclosure and what have you, that's all documented. But when we're talking, more broadly about the ethics around the project as a whole, I think normally I shy away from government regulation getting in the way of progress just on a personal level. But this is one of the cases where I feel like I agree a lot with the regulators in the EU and in Quebec and California, is that when we're making these big life altering decisions like adjudication or mortgage approval, we really need to be able to explain those decisions. So if I'm applying for a mortgage and they tell me I'm a high risk and I need to pay 8% while my neighbor's paying 4%,
Right.
I think I deserve to know why that is. You shouldn't be able to point at ChatGPT and say, well, the AI told me
Oh,
so, because that's going to affect my life, the life of my family. I
yeah.
deserve some sort of accountability on behalf of the provider. It's the same for approving grants, probation, university admissions. All these things have been floated as use cases for AI. And when we're making those critical decisions, we should certainly use the tools to augment the decision-making process. And Peter, this is how we advise our clients. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But it needs to be other people that are making that final decision.
Mm,
And it comes down to a lot of different ethical principles. There's fairness, this approach amplifying bias. We know most training data has those biases inherent in them. Is it a decision that demands explainability, like a mortgage or an approval process, that from a sense of accountability? Is this morally and ethically legal? And if so, who's ultimately accountable for that decision? In terms of robustness, have we explored all edge cases? Is this going to make correct decisions if it faces unfamiliar inputs? And a lot of that can sound kind of airy-fairy, but this is ultimately what led to all of those Boeing 737 crashes. It was a lack of model robustness. It didn't test it across all possible use cases. And then when the air pressure was a certain way, the heading was another way, your elevation was this way, the AI says, well, the best thing we can possibly do is fly straight down. And
yeah.
it's making light of a situation, but an untested model can have immediate life altering impact. So we need to test these things front to back.
Well, and those kinds of decisions have a huge financial, not only, I mean, full implications are massive and reputational are massive, but also obviously loss of life and other even bigger criminal potentially sort of implications to it, right? So there's a lot to that's a big yeah, this is a fascinating, like, yeah, we could probably spend a whole hour just talking about that. It's a fascinating topic, but we will not do that. So when you kind of, obviously we do a lot of we start a lot of our engagements with our clients collectively and together with a bit of a data assessment or a bit of a sort of kind of a look under the hood in terms of what the organization's trying to do, what they kind of have going, and what are some of their goals, and where maybe AI and automation can help. When we do that, what are the sort of most common gaps you see in terms of how tourism organizations are managing their data?
I think I try to find my words on this. Something I bang the drum on all the time is the technology ultimately doesn't matter. It's really a means to an end. And I think it's self-evident, but if I'm going to New Brunswick to look at, the beautiful leaves in the fall, and then I'm going salmon fishing in the Miramichi, and then I'm going to go to Hopewell Rocks, I'm not going to say, wait a minute, are these guys on AWS or are they on Azure? I don't really care what's happening behind the scenes. So it's a bit of a silly example, but it's not far off, because I find a lot of people get myopic and they get hung up on what technology, what applications are there, and whatnot. So we need to start with what the strategy is, what people are trying to accomplish, and then we build the technology that supports that, and then we determine what data needs to feed the technology that leads to those positive outcomes for the customer. And that's something that a lot of people in a lot of organizations, it's not unique to tourism, that they lack that coherent, systematic way of breaking down a client opportunity into what's the data we need to support this.
Hmm.
So What I find quite often is a client identifies an opportunity or they think we can improve this process with a new tool. And then we review the data together, we review the processes together, and we find a lot of other gaps that are contributing to that, or a much shorter path to victory that might take half the time of what the original proposal was. And I really love those discovery sessions because it's a
Mhm.
great way to understand the problem and to solution together. And I think very rarely have we delivered a project in the exact same way it was articulated originally by the client. So it's great to be able to get together and figure out what's the business opportunity, what's the technical solution, and
Yeah.
come up with that together. So even if it's not part of the original engagement, I think going through that exercise together, going through the data to see if there's any non-compliance or regulatory issues, it's a great way to paint a more holistic picture and make sure that we're solving the problem that they have and not just answering the mail.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point, and to your point, like, kinda to the point of how I always talk about this is, like, technology is the last 10% or the last mile. It's not the beginning, but it's often where 90% of the people start and wanna kinda talk, right? And it's, like so, like, kinda forcing people to flip the model a little bit and focusing on the right things first is actually how to get to the outcomes and the solutions that are gonna have the meaningful long-term impact that they're looking for, so, no, that's fantastic. So, when it comes to data governance and doing it properly, in a mid-market tourism, can you tell me a little bit about can they actually afford to do this? What does it look like at the mid-market? I'm also curious, just coincidentally, at the sort of more smaller market, kind of mom and pop shop type organizations. Your thoughts on both of those?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you go to a big four consultancy, they certainly have an off the shelf accelerator. It's going to be about a $500,000. And you'll end up with a 400-page binder sitting there. And I think that that thought scares off a lot of people that this is complex. We're not technically that
Yeah,
sophisticated. We've just got a few applications. We gather customer data. We've got it in Excel. Why do we need to worry about this? We're too small to really be concerned. And what we've found, without exception, is that there's always opportunities to improve. And I think every client that we've spoken with together has had some level of regulatory concern. And I won't certainly point fingers at anybody, and I don't think that there's anything malicious to that. It's for the most part a lack of understanding about exactly what their responsibilities are and how that ties out to their day-to-day processes and the data that they're capturing. So in no case do you need a $500,000 data governance framework and a huge technology team to be able to support this. What most people need is just a fit for purpose plan that tackles the immediate issues and makes sure that you have documented evidence and a training program that supports the protection of customer data. It might be through intuition that you're doing everything right, and that's usually what we see. People's disposition is generally good, but if they're not capturing that information, they don't have documented processes, they can't prove that it's being followed. That's really an easy fix. We can work together on that. We can come up with the policies, we can come up with a training program and a framework that's going to give them that evidence to protect themselves if the worst thing happens. And it might be your staff is doing insecure workarounds because of bad policy, like you only allow them to receive 1 megabyte attachments, so they're sending it to their Gmail and printing on the work computer or,
right,
putting it
right.
at home. We can work together on that too. That's an easy fix. Maybe you're capturing and storing sensitive information because you think this is going to be useful in the future. So we can work together again on that, unpack it and see if there's a middle ground and come up with a business justification for the data you are capturing. So it's different for every person that we've spoken with. It's just a matter of being systematic and intentional about protecting the data that you've been entrusted with.
Yeah, no, it's honestly, and things are moving fast, and just people don't know what they don't know, and it's a fast changing world, and every time I do these engagements with you, I learn a lot because I don't. There's a lot I don't know. This is not an area, and again, most people don't get into business to for these reasons and to learn about this stuff, but it doesn't make it less important, right? It's part of the game, right? So, kind of, why is this, in your opinion, extra important now? Is there more urgency today around the data governance conversation than there was maybe 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 months ago? Yeah, give me your perspective there.
I think there is, and it comes down to ambiguity. I think Canada has the most vague expectations about what's onside and offside in
Mhm.
terms of AI. And not just data governance, but AI more generally. We used to have some clarity with Bill C-27. under the previous government. It was very restrictive, but we had some sense of direction on what things were going to look like. And then there was also a federal employee handbook on the use of AI, which was about 30 pages, and 28 pages of that was how bad AI was generally. So you had a sense of where everything was going to land. But with the new government, Bill C-27 died on the order paper, and we don't know what the future looks like. So we get some hints from our new AI minister, Evan Solomon, the old CBC guy. And he said in a meeting, I think last week or a conference last year, that whatever we come up with needs to be, I think he said tight, right, and light. Kind of pithy, but I'm hoping that he sticks to that. He seems to have more of a pro business approach, and we know that they're giving AI startups a lot of money, but it appears to have some sort of motivation based on where the money's going and the type of industries it's going to.
Mm,
So we don't know if that type of picking winners is going to play out and what the regulations looks like. An analogy I always use is it's kind of like you're a property developer and you're building a condo and you don't know what the building codes are, but 5 years from now, there's going to be an inspector coming by and he's going to judge you retroactively. Your setbacks aren't right. You got to tear that building down.
yeah.
As we're making investments in this space and we're planting our flag, regardless of the size of your business, we really need to be mindful about where those boundaries are likely to end up so that no one comes back in 5 years and says we broke the law retroactively and we need to unwind
Yeah.
this new critical process.
No, that's really interesting. And so I'm going to frame this I'm going to go a little deeper on that answer and in this line of reasoning, because in tourism, obviously, we are often marketing to people from around the world. Canada is a huge global destination. And so, for example, you know, my heli skiing clients are all hardcore marketing into the European market. And so, help me understand then, I guess, maybe in that context, how maybe tourism operators and professionals should be thinking with respect to global standards. You mentioned GDPR before, which I think is considered by most the gold standard. I don't know if that's a positive or a negative. Maybe it's the most restrictive standard. Obviously, the US is doing what the US is doing, and it sounds like Canada's vague. So, in context of all of these different standards around the world, is there, first of all, one that they should be sort of maybe striving towards to make sure that in 5 years from now they're good? And then also, obviously, we're marketing to different jurisdictions around the world, and tell us a little bit about sort of operating under their standards, even though we're in Canada, and how that may complicate things in tourism.
Yeah, I need to caution or preface it by saying I'm not a lawyer and this isn't legal advice. This is just, I'm a interested spectator. But GDPR is definitely the most restrictive, or another way to look at it is it's the most consumer focused. So there's a lot of requirements in there around a right to be forgotten, which a lot of people don't have. If a client from a GDPR country reaches out to you and says, I want all the information that you have on me. Do you have the processes in place to go to your ERP and pull their information, your CRM, pull their information? Do you have a way to package it and get it to them in the timelines that are required? And if they say, you need to erase me, do you have a process to anonymize them in QuickBooks, erase them from your CRM, so on and so
Sorry,
forth?
I'm going to pause you there. So is that
Yeah,
somebody from a GDPR jurisdiction can ask somebody in Canada for that, or no?
they can. Is my understanding, again, not as a
Yeah,
lawyer,
not as a
that
lawyer. Yeah.
you are, yeah,
Maybe
if
it's,
you're advertising your services in a
yeah.
GDPR country, you need to abide by GDPR data privacy
So that's
laws.
a big deal for Canadian tourism.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even within Canada, we have, in the absence of a federal law, we have a voluntary code of conduct that Cohere has signed on to, that Google has signed on to. So that seems to be the type of framework we're going towards. In Ontario, they have the OHRC principles, which is specific to Ontario. There's the old Canada framework from a couple years ago, which is a long acronym. I don't remember what it stands for. So it's hard to know where we're going to land, and it's probably going to be a patchwork. An Alberta set of laws, an Ontario, Quebec set of laws, provincial laws or federal laws, GDPR, depending on where you serve. So I always encourage people just to go to that highest standard, which is the GDPR,
Right.
because wherever other people land is probably going to be at or below that level of severity.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's kind of the advice that we often follow and provide to our clients as well. But though that obviously has a lot more to it, and maybe a little bit more complexity or a little bit more to do. Right. So it is, but it is important, and I agree. And I think for Canadian tourism, we're a global destination and people come here from around the world. And, so that's, and many of our companies are in tourism are definitely marketing to those folks. So very, very important. All right. So obviously we're working on tourism tourism AI ops together. And as I mentioned, it's a platform designed specifically for DMOs and operators. And it's specifically around reporting and reporting requirements. And so what does getting governance right from the start look like, first of all, for us as we build this, and for these organizations down the road that might be looking to partner with us or use our technology?
Yeah, so much easier to have governance by design if you're building from the ground up with security in mind and data protection. Analogy I always use is, everybody has a disorderly garage where you've got offcuts of wood and old screws and, pieces of appliances that you've thrown out decades ago. I've got that myself. I've got a little workroom and I go in there about every couple of years and I'll spend half the day in there and I'll come out with a small handful of things I've been willing to throw away. But if you're conscientious and really judicious in what you bring in there in the first place, the problem never comes up. So
Yeah.
that's what we've been doing this way. We've been really looking at every element of data that we bring in, every process, and questioning, do we need this? How does it add value? How do we protect it? Is this under GDPR? Is this under PIPEDA? What is the different standards of care for this piece of data? Is it something we can throw away, anonymize, mask? How do we minimize risk for our clients and for ourselves? And for our clients, that means that, you can be confident that we've built this from the ground up around security, which is a much better way than just throwing everything into it and then
Right.
coming back later and picking those sensitive pieces out, which is a bit of a fool's errand after a couple of years.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I was at a conference, and just this last week at the tourism industry conference in British Columbia, and I was on a disruptive technologies panel, and we were talking about a lot of different things. And I didn't mean to come across this way, but I was very adamant about policies and slowing down and all these different things. And many people came up to me afterwards and were like, wow, you are like the voice of like caution and reason. And, again, it wasn't my intention. And certainly my other panelists were not out there and being I didn't think not cautious. I just feel like maybe I was just a sort of a contrary voice a little bit on a couple of things. But to me, it really opened my eyes in terms of where people are at. Again, back to where I started this conversation, the conversation is happening. And there's a number of different reasons why. And I think AI is really starting to be a lot more in people's faces now than it was before. And kind of what comes with that is data sovereignty, data risk. All these conversations then also become part of that conversation. So I think it's fantastic. I've been kind of talking about this for the last 3 years straight, not to the extent that you do, Jeremy, but at least at a high level. And I feel excited that this is kind of the conversation. And obviously, I feel very secure that we're building tourism ops AI together. And I have a guy like you in my corner that's making sure and double checking to make sure that we can build the most secure platform possible for our clients. So that's, for me personally, really makes me feel good. So last question here. So tourism leaders who are listening to this conversation, what's one thing they could or should do literally this week, and how can they work with us to get there even further?
I think a fun mental exercise, or maybe a scary one, depending how you look at it, is just to envision that you've been hacked. The hacker stole all your customer information, all your data. Local newspaper found out, and they're calling you with some questions. So, what question are you most scared of them asking?
Hmm.
And, you mentioned at the beginning, nobody got into tourism because they like to play with data. They like to worry about technology. It's a completely different mindset. And what comes with that mindset, I think, is that a lot of us will say the technology piece is unknowable. I don't understand technology. I don't need to. Someone else is probably worrying about that, but I can
Mhm.
plead ignorance if something goes wrong here. And you can't be absolved because of willful ignorance. I think business leaders nowadays, they're held to account for privacy actions and sometimes with disastrous consequences. If you got hacked and you had to pay $500,000 for a PIPEDA violation, is that something your organization is going to survive? And in most cases, people have to shut their doors just because
Yeah.
they can't afford those types of fines and that type of reputational damage. Once you've been in the newspaper for disclosing financial information and you need to pay TransUnion fees for a couple of years to all the people that trusted you with their personal info, like you can imagine the outcome from all this. It's nothing good. The shorter answer, what would I do today, is just walk through that mental exercise. What are you most scared of the public realizing? and then email us or email someone, get a plan together for addressing it. Your intuition, like we opened with, your intuition is probably right.
Mhm.
If you're scared about your retention policies, or that people are emailing social insurance numbers to each other, or they're using their home printer to print out copies of your customer's driver's license, you're probably right. All of those things are offside, and you need a plan to address those. So
Awesome.
that's where I would start.
I love it. It's such a valuable conversation. I think, Jeremy, probably not the last one we'll have on this topic, but let's leave it there for now. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your deep experience in this particular area of technology, which is, I think it's actually kind of exciting, despite the fact that I say that nobody gets into the business to do this part of things. I find always these mental exercise to be valuable, I guess, and it's very helpful to think through these things. So thanks so much, Jeremy.
Thank you for having me.